All right, Nebraska has, according to numerous reports now, a new athletic director. He is Troy Dannon. He is a former Marshalltown Bobcat. He is an '89 graduate of Northern Iowa. Now, I am familiar with him because my dad knows him.
Yeah.
Because of their time, because Troy ran the Iowa High School Girls Athletic Association. So uh, that's how I know Troy. And then Troy he ran that in Iowa. They have separate boys and girls athletic associations.
Mm-hmm.
So Troy ran the girls athletic association, and then he was hired back at his alma mater. And I know when he left Northern Iowa to go to Tulane, they were bummed because he had grown the department in Cedar Falls, which was not easy, and football had really started to take off when he was there. He's a football guy. He goes down to New Orleans, and the thing that stood out, and I've heard him talk about this, is he was in New Orleans trying to keep the Tulane athletic program alive during COVID. And of the hot spots in America, it was New Orleans, and you got an athletic department in a major city which already is not well funded,
right?
And you got to keep it above water. 22-23, they had across the board a huge athletic year, and then football with Willie Fritz was humming. And a short time in Seattle, I don't, I'm sure when Nebraska came calling, he was like, Nebraska to go back home?
Yeah.
Because he was only at Washington for 5 years. So that's what I know of him. More of his time in Iowa. But I texted my dad and I said, guess who's the new athletic director at Nebraska?
Did he say you?
No, he said the old one. Yeah. So here we go. You want connections? I know you just tweeted out, and I'll read this here in just a moment. This will trigger some people. The last two athletic directors in Nebraska have a connection to Cedar Falls, Iowa.
Yeah.
One, that's where he grew up, and the other, that's where he went to college.
Yep.
But there
Something
is
about Cedar Falls
I think probably for some maybe not a sexy hire. I think, and that's why I keep saying I think it's a good hire for Nebraska because it's just a solid hire of somebody who I'm not going to leave Washington alone, that has grown athletic programs and have had success in multiple sports. And, he's been put on committees where he's got a voice for the college football game. Pete Thamel included, and he was the first to report this, in the AAC. Dannon got to know Matt Rule when he was at Temple working.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be his connection to Rule. Not that you needed a connection to Rule, but everybody's searching to connect the dots on why he would be connected to Nebraska. But in less than a week, Nebraska hires a new athletic director, and they're still in a meeting right now to find a president. That's how we roll in Nebraska.
I'm still curious on the chain of command on how this happened, on who identified him, who presented it to the Board of Regents. I'll obviously get over that at some point, but it's just, and you ask the question, what does it say when you are able to, within a week's time, fill the athletic director chair, and yet 7 months have passed since you've been able to find the permanent replacement for Ted Carter? And I think you know the answer to that. But there's also the part of this process that maybe we'll learn in due time. I don't think it needed to be a large part of the process, but I mentioned this, and now that we know Nebraska has a new athletic director, how much of the input from people like Matt Rule, Fred Hoiberg, John Cook, other well-regarded coaches within the athletic department that will be impacted by this hire on a daily basis, how much of an input did they have? And overall, was that name, and again, with some connection there to Matt Rule, was that a suggestion? Again, not that it needed to be, but I think this is an important thing to remember that we were talking about yesterday, is the type of athletic department that you are coming into right now. If you're Troy Dannon, you don't have this unrest when it comes to coaches' futures, uncertainty. In fact, Fred Hoiberg's was made even more clear yesterday. The day before you hire a permanent athletic director.
Yeah, so let's
go,
let's go back real quick before you finish that thought, Nick. A week ago, Nebraska loses their athletic director. Yesterday, it's publicly announced, and the signatures on the contract are the interim president and the interim athletic director,
right,
that Fred Hoiberg has an extension and a raise.
Mm-hmm.
And now this morning, they have a new athletic director. No confirmation from the university yet, but I'm sure Pete Thamel is just throwing that out there.
Right.
It happened pretty quickly. And, people are wondering about the timeline. When did Matt Rule know? Did anything that Matt Rule said on Monday, did it, kind of like you're alluding to?
Yes.
Did that all add up?
That's what I'm very curious about. And did his very confident tone on Monday, and I didn't expect, even if they had zero plan, and maybe as of Monday they didn't, at least as far as Matt Rule was concerned, it was always going to be a rallying of the troops, State of the Union type tone with Matt Rule. But I do now wonder, knowing that, and Pete Thamel put that out there, that there is a connection to Matt Rule and their time in the AAC together. If he had an inkling of, hey, we're leaning towards this guy, you know him, what do you think? Or did Matt Rule at some point say, hey, I know a guy, just so happens to be at a fellow Big Ten school right now, Midwest dude, what do you think? Either way, it does make it interesting with a lot of the points that Matt Rule hit on Monday. But I think this goes back to the conversation we had yesterday about the type of athletic department you're walking into now, with more stability when it comes to the coaches' futures, that you have a guy that is based on this resume. It seems like that is a seamless transition where you're not necessarily bringing in somebody who is a distinguisher of fires, because that's not really what the situation needed right now. It's someone who is very familiar with college football and the changing landscape of college football, a guy that's been on different committees, a guy that is spent not very long time, but spent some time in a group of five that is now going to be a part of the Big Ten, but also, going back to what you bring up, has built each step along the way, has built and has elevated his status at each stop. That, to me, given the state of this athletic department right now, is probably right in the wheelhouse of what you're looking for. And I think that's where a lot of people are right now, is hadn't heard of the guy. We heard a lot of the names.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about Pat Kraft. We're talking about even Jamie Pollard. Those are names that you're aware of. Those are names that either there's a connection with Matt Rule, or knowing how successful Jamie Pollard has been at Iowa State, and knowing that he was, he had publicly turned down the job before, took his name out of the running or under consideration for it, that maybe this time around it would come back. But there was always going to be candidates that we hadn't necessarily discussed or heard of. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. I think there's a lot of things, if you quickly look back at the resume, that you can see where it adds up to why this person presented himself as a strong candidate to replace Trev Alberts.
So there is a one. Let me just double check one thing here, because I'm starting to connect dots. I'm about ready to give you just a bizarro connection.
Yes.
Okay. So let me just read a couple of things out of Pete Thamel's article.
Okay.
Did Nebraska officials prioritize Dannon's Midwest ties and strong football background, as he has worked on the NCAA Football Oversight Committee, NCAA Football Competition Committee, and also the NCAA Transformation Committee. He's been a big part of Big Ten meetings since starting at Washington. I do know that he was involved in how we're going to schedule for Olympic sports, so he knows the workings of the league. Thamel, quoting a source, he's an Iowa guy who understands the values of Nebraska, sitting athletic director who understands the Big Ten and doesn't need to get caught up in the Big Ten. A source close to Dannon said the decision was deeply personal, as both him and his wife's entire family are living in Iowa. So Troy is from Marshalltown, went to Northern Iowa. He'll be the fourth athletic director at Nebraska since 2013. You want to go another step that's even wilder?
Yes, please.
Great. There was a guy named Doug McDermott who committed to UNI, Ben Jacobson,
Yep.
who is one of Mac's best friends.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to sort through that situation, Troy Dannon was the athletic director at Northern Iowa when they had to sort through releasing Doug so that he could follow Dad to Creighton.
So he's a fair guy. That's what you're saying.
I'm saying that there probably was a information, give me the lowdown discussion between two former Panthers.
Mm-hmm. It sounds right. Yeah. It all ties together. How about that? So, are we
And
thinking
those Northern Iowa guys stick together.
They really do.
They do. They are.
So this turns out well. We're giving Greg an attaboy, Coach Mac. Thank you.
So their time at Northern Iowa crossed over because Mac was Mac graduated in 88? Troy Dannon graduated in 89?
Oh. Yeah.
So Troy Dannon, according to Pete Thamel, set to be named the new athletic director at Nebraska. This appears to have been put in motion pretty quickly. I know that Nebraska, they started vetting guys like right away last week, and it only took them a week. And we're still waiting on the president, which I think when this all settles, we're going to start to be able to connect some dots by whatever name comes out of the Board of Regents. All right.
Wild. This is just wild.
March Madness, baby.
If you would have told me at the beginning of the week that before we even get to Creighton playing on Thursday, that we would be talking about a new athletic director, I would have thought you're nuts. But I do wonder, I can't remember who brought this up. I do wonder if Troy Dannon was under consideration the first go-around when they landed on Trev. I just wonder if a lot of that vetting process, because you know how that works. If someone is impressive, they don't necessarily get the job, but they impress you. And there are members that are either part of that search committee or people that are still at the university. They keep their eye on those people all the time. And it's kind of like any athletic director having that short list of coaches that in case their head coach gets hit by a bus, they are able to go into that drawer and look at that list and say, okay, here's my next ones in line. I do wonder if Troy Dannon was talked to, was under any type of consideration almost 3 years ago when Trev got the job.
You want another connection?
I do.
When Troy Dannon was the athletic director at Nebraska, going to be the athletic director at Nebraska, when he was the athletic director at Northern Iowa, and football, so he's a football guy.
Yeah.
Like Northern Iowa football was doing well when he was there. Tulane football was doing well. He's had an interesting 5 months in Seattle because he's watched his football team go to the national championship game. The coach leave, have to hire a coach. Yeah. He just fired his basketball coach. Scott Frost was on the Northern Iowa staff when Troy Dannon was the AD.
People forget
in Cedar
Scott
Falls.
Frost was there under Coach Farley. So did he hire Farley over at Northern Iowa? I believe he's still there too.
I think he may have already been there.
Okay.
I think he was already there.
Okay.
All right. Brandon Vogel from counterread.com will join us next on 1620 The Zone.
Mornings with Sharp and Hanley.